so this is our storytelling portion of the evening. It's been a busy week on Normandy Avenue. It's a busy time at the church, preparations for the hanging of the greens going on, the upcoming Christmas pageant, and preparing for the influx of visitors that seems to bolster the numbers around this time of year. Seems that near the holidays, more and more people come into the church for the first time right around this time of year. Perhaps it's to hear the familiar rituals of their youth that come this time of year, or maybe it's just to have a place to discuss the sometimes conflicting impressions that happen in a rational mind at this time full of talk of miracles and belief and faith. Or maybe it's just at this time of the season when even Dallas gets a little cold and a little gray, people feel a little bit alone and think it's nice to be in the company of others. Well, due to that influx of anticipated visitors, our own Pastor Inquist, Daniel Cantor, has decided to hold the first ever greeters training workshop on a Thursday evening in the library. It was a new initiative, part of the new, bolder, brighter, more proud future that he envisions for the church in the coming years. And the idea was to practice the very basic skill of welcoming, which is a skill that other church traditions seem to have no problem with, but for some reason Unitarians are just not quite comfortable with. Perhaps it is a fear of saying anything that resembles the gregarious proselytizing that so many fleeing Baptists and Presbyterians have revulsion at. So they're there to practice how to invite these guests, to sign the guest book, to get on the mailing list, to come back another time and see if we are who we say we are. But also to not fall into the common you trap of apologizing to someone before you've ever met them, a sort of I'm not trying to interfere with what you've got going on, but if you're a guest, and if you're not, I'm sorry that I didn't know that, but if you are, and you want to find out more about us, and you want to give us your email, if that's not too invasive, and then we could send you a newsletter if you want to look at it, only if you have time, you understand, and should you like what you see, and I'm not presupposing that you will, but should you, and you want to come back, you're welcome to come back, and I also have a name tag for you that you're under no obligation to sign if you're not into labeling, but if you'd like to, just come on in. That's what they were trying to avoid. So that's why they were gathered on that Thursday night. And as they came in, the members saw a face that they didn't recognize, standing right next to the table. His name was William. And though he was very shy, he was standing right next to the sign-in table, helping everyone with their name tags. Now, unbeknownst to them, as he was writing the name, William was also counting up the point value of those names. Not in a Kabbalist sort of a way, but in a Scrabble sort of a way. Some people, when they get nervous, they hum, they pace, they smoke. William was a counter of the Scrabble points in people's names. That's if proper names were allowed, which they're not, but it didn't bother him. It was a defense mechanism. It was a shy person's tool for dealing with stressful situations, and it served him well over the years. He intentionally had requested a new doctor from his preferred provider list at work, a Dr. Zedlitz on Walnut Hill, because he knew he'd be so distracted by the 26 points that the man's name represented, he'd forget to feel uncomfortable when he was asked to turn his head and cough. It had served him well. Scrabble had been his salvation in many times of stress. After he and his wife, Julia Mandenberg, 28 points, decided to split up 4 years ago, it was Scrabble that first got him back out into the world. It had been a difficult time, but he and Julia are now very amicable. They still exchange Christmas cards. Neither of them are actually Christian, but it's just so much easier when people ask how things are to say, oh, it's fine, we still exchange Christmas cards. Because as we all know, that's the definition of amicable in a divorced relationship. Amicable, 14 points. Now, David was not a social person by nature, obviously. William was not a social person by nature, so his therapist, Soigné, 8 points, thought that he should get some social interaction. So it was the freestanding Scrabble table at the Barnes & Noble that first got him back out into the big wide world. He'd go there and lose himself in letters, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, which was perfect because he enjoyed it and it was technically social interaction, but it didn't require actually speaking to any of the people you were playing with. It was ideal in his situation. He and Julie had both attended First Church before the divorce, but afterwards he'd kind of stopped coming. And he told himself he was going to come back, and he told himself he was going to come back, but he kept coming up with excuses why this wasn't a good week and this schedule wouldn't allow it. But then he got the newsletter, that newsletter, and he knew he had to come back. He'd heard people tell stories in the Roots class about the way the universe had pushed them in so many subtle ways towards finding this church. But when he saw that newsletter, that blatant and unmistakable nexus of his personal coping mechanism, his own nervous pathology, and his spiritual path, to see that newsletter addressed to him, William Kenton, 22 points, that newsletter, saying that the new minister of pastoral care, Kalani Kachela, would be giving the sermon, an X and a K. He couldn't resist. So he came back. And he kept coming. He'd sit very quietly in the far left side, and he realized that, shy as he was, he liked being around people. He liked being around these people. He was turning a page. He was a new William. So to that end, he signed up to be an usher and a greeter. And that's how he ended up before the first service in the narthex, trying to remember everything that Daniel Cantor, 17 points, had explained to him. Keep it simple, Daniel had said, 10 words or less. Welcome. Would you like to sign the guest register? So William had practiced. He'd gone over it in his head. He went out to the meditation garden before the service and said it over and over. Welcome, would you like to sign the guest book? Welcome, would you like to sign the guest book? Welcome, would you like to sign the guest book? He went to the meditation garden because he hoped people would assume he was part of the Buddhist meditation group and not just a crazy person talking to himself out loud. He kept repeating it. Welcome, would you like to sign the guest book? And when he felt ready, he went into the narthex and he began to greet people. He stood by the guest book. He was armed with his new mantra, his stack of name tags, his Sharpie. And for a moment, he felt brave. He felt like he was conquering something. He saw a dark-haired woman loitering near the glass doors with that unsure look of someone who's not entirely sure of what kind of place this is. Someone who's ready to bolt at the first sign of a pastor in a Hawaiian shirt or anything that you can be submerged in. So he decided this was the moment, and he started to walk towards her, and as he walked, his heart rate increased. And in his head, he heard the words that he was preparing to say. Welcome, would you like to sign the guest book? Welcome, would you like to sign the guest book? Welcome, would you like to book the guest sign? Welcome, would you like to register your sign, please? Welcome, this is the sign of welcome. Welcome, my sign is Virgo, what's your sign? And when he got there, he said, dry-mouthed in a voice barely above the whisper, we have donuts. And the woman was taken aback by the pure and simple honesty of that statement. She smiled and she said, thank you, William. And for a moment he was mortified that this was a woman he knew and hadn't realized that he knew, and somehow he'd failed to recognize her and she'd recognized him, and he now felt embarrassed because it was foolish and somehow rude, and then he remembered suddenly that he was wearing a name tag. Untrusting of what might come next out of his mouth, he just held out the name tag and the Sharpie. And she took them. And she wrote her name. Monique Zayed. But William did not add up the letters in her name. Despite the near Holy Grail-like quality of a Q and a Z in the same name, 36 points waiting to be added up in his private walled-off calculation chamber of the mind. But he did not go there. He didn't. He stayed right there in that narthex and said, welcome. Welcome. We're glad you're here. That's the news from Normandy Avenue. where all the thinkers are free, where all the minds are open, and where all the children are self-actualizing.